Good afternoon. I'm excited to welcome you all to the Security Information Event Management in the Cloud, a modern approach to cyber defense panel. My name is Derek Bumball. I'm a project manager with Mantech. Our moderator for the panel will be Mr. Jason Abernathy. Please give Mr. Abernathy and the panel a warm welcome. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon. So apparently I'm talking about SIEM. About an hour ago I threw my speech away. So what I really want to talk about today is data and why data is important. That'll feed into the SIEM approach, but before we get started, I want to introduce the rest of my panel. I brought a couple of guests along with me, John Basie and Brian Hinnigan. They care about data from a different standpoint. John is our ICAM PM to include Global Directory. Brian is the chief over endpoint, and then Scott King on the end. He's actually the smart guy that'll actually take the crazy ideas I come up with and turn them into reality. So I'll give them just a moment to introduce themselves, and then we'll jump in.
Awesome. Happy to be here. Thanks, everybody, for stopping by and listening to us ramble on about data. I am the ICAM PM for DISA, the Enterprise Identity, Credential, and Access Management that is made up of basically three pillars: identity provider, the Global Directory, GFUD, as well as a workflow system, and then a master user record. All of this supports data, consumes data, and really helps secure data. And with that, I will pass it over to Brian.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brian Hennigan. I am the portfolio manager for endpoint security at DISA. We do all the DoD endpoint security products, Neutralix, C2C, ASIM, Forescout, that kind of thing, right? So we manage all those acquisitions and PM projects there. For us, data is really important, right? So when you do security, data is one of the biggest things that we look at. How do you secure your data, make sure your data is going to the right places? We have interactions with ICAM, we have interactions with Jason's group and the data, where it's stored, how it's stored, and all of that. So we really care about this. It's a really evolving topic, especially as we move to the cloud and we evolve the way that we think and the way that we handle this stuff. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Scott King. I'm the chief engineer for ID6. So I am overseeing the portfolio of capabilities that underneath Mr. Abernathy, which consists of cyber, analytic, and other cyber situational awareness capabilities. We get asked a lot to solve problems. A lot of the mission owners come to us and say, hey, I need the tool, I need the capability, I need the technology, I need the thing that solves all my problems. So we are the ones that try to make all that happen and keep everybody happy at the same time, because it's not easy to keep everyone happy. But we try to build the capabilities on a sound architectural approach. We partner with our contract teams, who are probably, some of them are here, I think. And so, yeah, we are really looking at leveraging cloud. Traditionally, we've been focused on the DoDIN as a network infrastructure for doing our monitoring. We have a lot of capabilities that are on-prem, and we're now in the process of migrating those capabilities to the cloud. So that's been one of our big challenges for us. Most of the data we have right now, I don't know percentages. I would say at least 90% of our data is on-prem data coming from network infrastructure. But as our customers are migrating to the cloud, a lot more of the mission partners that we have data that's being generated in the cloud. So data has been one of our biggest problems. So that's been probably the biggest challenge with getting a handle on how do you support missions in all these different spaces and all these different locations and all these different classification levels. So we have that big challenge, and we'll talk a little bit about what we're doing and what we're planning to do.
So about 8 weeks ago, I was offered an opportunity to lead ID6 in the cyber situational and analytics tools. So I had no idea what that was. I just knew that it was a program with a bunch of data platforms and a bunch of cyber tools. I did know some people in the community, and so I started having some phone calls. conversations about where their pain points were at, what the daily life of an operator looked like, and I kept hearing the same thing. One, I've got to log into 16 systems to be able to correlate all my data. I see a bad actor come into the IIP, but then I've got to log into JRSS, and then I got to log into a hack system or maybe a JSP system, or one of 18 different data silos across the agency to do their DCO mission. Everybody talks about, how do I get to a single pane of glass, or how do I get to, one visual landscape that I can see. So as I start thinking about that problem and the tools we have in our portfolio, I quickly realized that what we really need to focus on is the infrastructure that will support our data, and actually using data as a product and creating that, and then pushing that product back to the operators so they can visualize what they need when they need it. So with that, we've got a few slides I'll let Scott talk through on what that approach might look like, and then we'll open up for questions at the end.
Okay. All right, so as I said, we're migrating a lot of our on-prem capabilities to the cloud. SIEM or SIEM is the core of security incident monitoring, right? So that is the central dashboard that most of our operations analysts use to monitor security events on the network. So it is a critical capability. It's near real time. It needs to be able to present concisely to the analyst what's going on at that moment and do some kind of correlation with events to be able to determine what is the root cause of an issue. So, but I'm going to focus less on the SIEM as the dashboard, because really the thing that makes that work is the data that's fed into the dashboard. You can have the greatest, prettiest dashboard in the world, but it's not going to do anything for you if it doesn't have any valid data in it. So that is where we've been kind of focusing our enhancements going forward, is at the data layer. So disclaimer, this is for general information purposes only. They put this in here. All right, so DISA has a office that put together a data strategy. I took this from their data strategy because this is something that DISA as a whole is focusing on, and data-centric approaches to how we do business is really what DISA needs to focus on going forward. And this comes directly from Gartner. So I didn't want to put my own picture up here because this isn't my idea. This is stuff that other folks are doing. This is just us adopting the approach that industry is kind of following right now. And Gartner is kind of classifying this as the data-centric framework. So for the most part, we're doing all of this today, but we don't really do each piece of this really well. So we ingest data. So at the first level where you have log and event data coming in, that's a big challenge, just to go out to each of the different stakeholders in the organization and get the data in the first place. That is a big challenge. So I would say, again, 90% of our work is getting data, right? Once we get the data feeds into our SIEM tool, that's where most of our work is done. From there, it's just the analysts leveraging that data to build dashboards and doing analytics on that data. The biggest work is really getting to the data and various types of data. So we have an ingest process. We have got a data broker. We have data hubs or data lakes or data repositories, but we have too many of those, right? So we don't really, in our legacy approach to things, the tool was the solution, and we didn't really have a specific focus on what do we do with the data and how do we take care of the data. It kind of all just went into the various tools. So this is something that we're going to focus on, and the analysts want to be able to use that data to make decision, right? So that is the key focus here, is to support decision making on the operations side. So this next slide, and this is not death by slides because I only have 3, I think. This is really what we're trying to do now, is to treat data as a product. For those of you that were in the luncheon today, the CDAO rep talked about this, and I almost felt like he was stealing my thunder because I was going to talk about the same thing that he was talking about. But so data is the critical piece of information that your mission has. Supporting the decisions that you make, all of the decisions you make are based on the data and the accuracy of that data. And the most important thing that we need to start doing is making sure that we focus on building high quality data. This is also something the CDAO talked about. That data needs to be accurate, complete, legible, relevant, reliable, timely, valid, right? This is something that I think a lot of folks stop at ingesting the data, and then that data starts getting stale. It's not as valuable to the end users, and this is something that we have to treat as a product, right? So if we start focusing on data as the product, we will have data product owners that take ownership of data, and they have to kind of attest to that data quality for that data. Right now, it's hard to figure out whether or not a piece of data is true or accurate, and that leads to false positives and all of the things that your organization and your analysts are doing that kind of doesn't support the mission. It kind of takes time away from doing the mission. So one of the famous examples I always think about when I talk about sensor data and data quality is the Boeing 737 MAX issue that they had with their angle of attack sensors. Well, so they have these sensors on the 737 MAX, and the sensors send data to the software, and the software says, oh, I'm going up and I need to go down, so it forces the plan to go down. That was not actually true data. That was a sensor that was not transmitting accurate data. It was valid data because it was transmitting directional data. It was just stuck in the up position. So the plane thought it was going up. This is just an example of how data in and of itself can't be trusted implicitly. We have to take ownership of data and make sure that we can validate that data. One of the recommendations they made was to use 2 sensors to compare this to instead of 1, which was a good recommendation. But in our own missions, we deal with people's lives as well. So that's why this is critical. So finally, what do we plan to do? We are going to take the data and build a data platform in the cloud where we can offer that data service, right? And this is really a service. We have to be able to take data, ingest it in, here we're going to ingest it into the cloud, turn those into data products. A data product is something that is consumable by an end user who doesn't really even need to know the intricacies of how that data product was put together, right? So the consumer just wants to get access to that data. The data platform and the data engineering team delivers the data products. The data owners make sure that the data is accurate and valid, and then it can deliver that data to your SIEM and other tools like business intelligence tools and things like that. So this helps us with cost savings through data reusability, data deduplication, and AI ML powered analytics. This is really just making sure that your AI and ML is fed the correct and accurate data so that it can help you making those decisions versus having bad data, stale data, outdated data. The key thing here is, we have a lot of data that we don't really have a good handle on at all. And if we could pull that data together and weaponize that data, we could support the mission a little bit better in terms of the cyber situational awareness, understanding where our threats are coming from, and responding to those threats. So that's where we are focusing in the next year. We're starting with pilots now. We're looking at vendors for help. One of the things I'm trying to do is be multi-cloud in this approach. So our mission partners are wherever they fight, wherever their data is. So we need to be able to be where they are and help them out. So that means that we are inherently doing this in a multi-cloud environment. So that kind of lends to not being stuck in one cloud. I think that's about it. That's all I have for these slides. So we can now transition to the Q&A portion of this.
Fun stuff. All right. Jason, you want to take that, or do you want me to start?
No good.
Okay. So we talked a lot about data in the cloud and the SIEM and what we're doing, right? So a big piece of this is security. We want to make sure that we can validate the person that's getting the access, that they have valid access to that information, and that the systems that they're coming from are honorable systems, that they make sense, right? They're accredited, they're known systems, they're systems that they should be using, they're located where they should be located, and they're doing what they should be doing. So how we do this is, like you said, we're looking at multi-cloud tenant, hybrid environment. We still have an on-prem, we still have a lot of legacy stuff. It's not all evolution, like straightforward. We're not jumping straight to the cloud. There'll be years of dual operations between on-prem and cloud environments, right? So we need solutions and vendors that can support both. So that's really what we're looking for, right? Is how do we move forward? How do we evolve that culture from the traditional defense in depth? That endpoint, that laptop, that machine is the most important thing. So now transitioning that to data, right? The information that's saved in that machine is just as important, if not more important, than the actual machine itself now. So how do we transition to that, and how do we get there? So I'll open that up to the panel here and to the audience if anyone has any questions or wants to kick us off.
Want me to go ahead and take it? All right, so I want to kind of piece all that together from what we're talking about SIEM and what we're talking about data, and kind of get back to the basics and where kind of ICAM fits into this. The data itself has to be trusted, to be validated as to whether or not the interactions in the environment are truly intentional, or they're mistakes, human error, or they're adversary actions. The data systems rely on the ICAM as in validating that the user interaction is a valid human being versus a bot or an adversary. So we need that reliable data information to be able to set up that the identity and access is being provided to the right systems at the right time. But on the same aspect, all the systems that do the data monitoring of our for activities and the attributed base security, and we get into AI security platforms, they have to actually pull into our records of who is supposed to have that access at a particular start time and a particular end time, and it fully be automated so there isn't human judgment being overly cautious when things need to happen at an immediacy, as opposed to waiting to see, let me check with my boss, let me check with some supervisor. It all needs to be unified, automated, and based across the whole platform.
In real time.
In real time.
Yeah, that's one thing that we all struggle with. I'm sure you've seen it in your own organizations, is that data will come in, it'll be good, relevant data, but it'll take a week, 4 days, 5 days, whatever it is, to get to a senior leader to make a decision. So now the data is no longer relevant, right? And that's something that we struggle with, especially in the military and civilian operations, is we have to go through several different checks to make sure that that PowerPoint or that presentation, whatever it may be that day or that week, is valid and good and spell checked and everything else, and has seen 1,000 different eyes before it gets to that senior leader that's going to make that decision. You know, that risk decision is important, and that may not be valid by the time it gets to where it needs to go to make that decision. So speed and accuracy is really important.
I know it's even caveat, like this isn't like a new problem. Data by itself has been a big issue across the DoD for a while about trusting it, validating, is it coming from the right sources, but most importantly, are the users that are injecting the data doing it with all those, like, they know what they're doing and they're putting it in, and they're making conscious that it's not just a quick, I gotta hurry up and get this data input done and over with so I can go to lunch. All of these things has second, third order, fourth order consequences down the line. So it's very important that the data integrity at input is as accurate as possible. And I think it also comes back to data standardization and attributes, and the fact that if every field is wide open for 5,000 characters, that's really hard to categorize and monitor and trace throughout environments.
Yeah.
It needs to be defined down and restricted.
Yep. Especially in an environment as large as ours and as rich as ours, like we said earlier, a hybrid environment, we have to have standardization of that data, so that way we can get it down to that bare minimum understanding of what it is as fast as possible.
Yeah, I may be completely off base or out of topic, but I remember the days when every time an engineer had to figure out what's the standard. We ran to IEEE, you ran to ISO, and there was a rule set. And somewhere along the line, things just kind of went to blurred, and people expected the government to just give the definitions for everything. And I think what we really need from industry is, as the keynote speaker talked about at lunch, data isn't a competition between vendors. Data is the information for us in the DoD to get after mission effectiveness. The products you provide is how do you leverage and present that data and process it at the speed at which it is, but not setting a data standard over here that's different from this proprietary vendor, different from this proprietary vendor.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and one of the other challenges we have is that each mission refers to the data as their data. So a lot of times it's really hard to identify who the data owner is, right? And the data owner might be someone who isn't actually concerned about the data because it's not their mission to use the data to defend the infrastructure or defend the DoD networks. So yeah, we have a big challenge. The other challenge we have is that you have different programs with different data repositories. They're very stovepiped. Trying to get the information timely to the analysts so that they can see what's going on within the environment is a big challenge. It's no small undertaking. They want as much data as they can get to make a decision, but their way of looking at that data is that they're treating it like it's true and valid. But we really need to look at that and see how we're providing this data. There's different sources of the data. We need authoritative sources of the data. There are some sources of data that I would consider more authoritative than others. This is something that organizations really need to grapple with, because you will get duplicative copies of data from different data sources. Some data sources may not be as accurate as others. So you really have to take a look and see, okay, where is my authoritative source for this particular data? And this person is the data owner for this, and they need to know that they are responsible for making sure that this stays accurate. That way you can build a mission, and you can be assured that your capabilities are going to operate reliably over time. I think that's the other big challenge we have.
I'm going to jump in again, actually, and say, building on what Scott's saying, is that the data has to be more transparent to the DoD as the owners, as the keynote was talking about at lunchtime. The data cannot be protected between a proprietary layer with a vendor system or a vendoring monitoring tool. I think we get in a lot of trouble in the DoD when we're constantly presenting the business analytic chart, the pie chart, and not telling the why, or being transparent with where that data is coming from into feeding the why and the so what to command decisions. So I tend to, in any of the contracts that I end up adjudicating over, I tend to look for when the vendor starts telling me, oh no, you don't have to see and log into our system with read only to see the data, we'll provide you the report. That's a no-go in my book. I want to be able to periodically spot check the data and where it's coming from, even if I'm not actually processing billions of points of information every day, but at least to know that the data coming in is transparent and there's no spin, there's no story putting on the data. The data is just the reality of what it is, and then the story gets told at the command table, the commander's decisions.
All right, so what I think everybody's hearing is that the reality of the Department of Defense is that we are going to be a multi-cloud, hybrid on-prem cloud organization for the foreseeable future, right? So, we've got. I think I heard yesterday we had, roughly 15,000 devices across the business alone, multiple sensors at IAPs, a lot of on-prem data we're pushing into now. Most recently pushing into an AWS, and Splunk SIEM, but we've got data silos everywhere across the agency. So as we collapse those environments, where we're really looking for industry help is how do I allow the data to sit where the mission dictates it, but still allow the DCO community to visualize that where it makes sense. I don't want to get into a situation where I'm paying egress costs to push everything into one bucket. And I also need to ensure that the operators are seeing it in real time. So with that, I think we'll open up for questions. And
Yeah, one more thing. We are leveraging Zero Trust as well. So we're working with our Thunderdome partners to kind of see how do we better leverage Zero Trust logs and information to improve how we gather data, right? Where do we put sensors, right, so that we can accurately gather the data from the network? Integrating with Thunderdome is a perfect synergy for us because the mission, if the service is running across Thunderdome, we have a consistent place where we can gather that data. Right now, with the DODIN being at practically every site where there's a military presence and even places where there aren't a military presence, it's just a challenge to physically get there. If there's a way that we can get the traffic somehow and see that and add some of the capabilities to that, Zero Trust is going to do that. We'll know more about who's accessing what and when, and that just means that we can make better decisions based on that data.
Yeah, I want to add a scope to this, right? So the DoD is projected to be 14 million devices across the entire world, right? World, scope it out, world. 14 million devices, that's a lot, right? That's bigger than, we are the third largest network in the world behind China and the US. And we make up a third of the US, right? So just to kind of put that in perspective and scope. And we're looking for help with that. That's what we're really trying to figure out. How do we manage this? How do we identify it? If we can't authoritatively say we know everything that's connected to our network and where it resides and what it's doing, we've at a loss. We're behind. We're in the back foot. And that's not where we want to be. We want to be on the front foot. We want to be pushing adversaries. We don't want to be responding to adversaries. We want them to be responding to us. And that's what we're trying to do with this. By understanding the data, by making sure that the hardware is respectable, that we know what it is, that we trust it, that it's accredited, that the users are accredited, that the users are trusted, we're able to move forward and make those fine-grained decisions on control access that we're not able to make today. And then a lot of that is a cultural shift, and some of that is a technology shift for us. And so that's what we're looking to the field for, the enterprise for. We're looking to you guys for those ideas, those, as thought leaders in the space to help us get to where we need to go. So we'll go ahead and open it up to the panel, or to the audience now. Sorry.
So thank you to the panel. If anyone from the audience has questions, please feel free to come up to the microphone. Thanks.
All right, no questions.
All right, we'll go home. All right.
I was hoping everybody was in a hurry to get a beer, but
Yeah, happy hour soon, right?
Mr. Abernathy, does Dr. Herman know that you were left unsupervised?
he does.
He was
and,
here a
and
second.
Most
He was out here a second.
most of his headaches are my fault. So
You didn't have full disclosure.
full disclosure. That's right.
Actually, so this one's for you, Mr. Abernathy, whether you can wide open. We talk about the data, right? The data. One of the terms that was brought up there was the so what. And when we talk to leadership, it's like so what and so why. Enormous amounts of data are only useful if they're actually the thing that the analyst needs when he needs it, and he can sit through all the other stuff to get to it. So, when the Office of the Chief Data Officer was up here and talking about data quality, it really got me thinking in terms of what the user actually needs. How do we know that we are, and we are, all ID, right, that we are actually delivering the data that they need in a context that they can actually get to it, instead of here's 15 stacks of hay and there's a really cool deal in there somewhere. So in terms of really how the analysts are using it, how they are, what their use cases are, to ensure that we're spending our very limited resources on the data that they actually need to defend the building?
So great question, Doug. So I'll start, and then Scott will probably tell me I'm wrong and correct me where he needs to. But where the reason I think the infrastructure is so important before we get the data is that if we build the infrastructure correctly, so that I can see all the data and visualize all the data, then I can use advanced tools like SOAR, so I can bring in workbooks, playbooks, use machine learning or AI to start automating the events that I'm seeing, right? So, and I think where you're going with the question is what I see from inside of our current AWS SIEM is we're pushing 100% of data through an indexer, and about 15% of it, maybe 20% of it, is actually being used by the actual DCO community. So, do we need to run all of that through a vendor, or do we just need to ensure that it's enriched and accurate, so they can choose what they need when they need it, and then and again with the if you build that correctly, to make models work, you have to have large sets of accurate data. Right now we have multiple small sets of silos. Okay.
Yeah, I mean that's a big problem, because if there's a incident that happens and there's petabytes of data that has been gathered during the time frame of that incident, who has time to go through petabytes of data? And they don't really, that's impeding the getting to what happened. Were we even affected by whatever this was? It could be an indicator of compromise. So what we want to be able to do with the data is to be able to organize the data in such a way that you can get to the relevant data as quickly as possible, right? That's the solution. We're never going to not have lots of data. We're always going to have lots of data. But that is the big problem that we're trying to solve with making the data relevant and then having a way to get to the data very quickly. So I would like for an analyst to be able to isolate based on, say, an indicator, all of the data relevant to that thing that happened versus having to just literally go through petabytes of data just because we don't really have a good handle on it.
This is also where endpoint security is really important, right? This is where we have to have those interactions with the customer and say, okay, how are you using this information? What is the information that you need? Did we deploy what you needed? Did you get out of it what you needed? Was it timely? Was it fast? Was it relevant? Did it help you save money and time at the end of the day? Were you able to save that system at the end of the day? Or were you not? You take those lessons learned and then evolve the product, go back to the vendor and say, hey, this didn't work. Show us what else you can do, right? So we have to have those interactions. That's really important.
So I'm gonna approach this question from a different angle, because you took half of my statement out of there already about staying in constant communication with the warfighters at the most forward edge and constantly having that community feedback. But from a vendor point, as you said, you don't want to invest $1 million into a product that feeds a specific lane of data only for us to change the goalpost the next year. And the answer to that kind of still building on a lot of the conversation of today, you build your product that for whatever data it generates, there's an API to pull that out. That you don't, within your product, set up barriers where even though the user or the individual can input all this stuff in a web form, well, you don't get all that on the back end. You only get the 5% because the other 95 was just too hard to code the API. Now, you got to invest in the API, then it can scour your product, your service, and index that data point, and in some way that API to API, the tools can intertalk. That the data doesn't become the weapon being hoarded by within a product or a service.
Hi. I'm going.
Go for it.
Hi. This is Dr. Shafima, Senior Records Manager at DISA. Have you consulted with the record management community about what you're trying to do? Or the librarians by chance with your data idea? Many of us have experience with data, such as e-discovery tools that can actually crawl a lot of what you're trying to do, a lot of the records management tools. I know that some of us have not. actually has many parameters that can help with this. Just putting it out there. So for me, I know the vendor community is wonderful, but I know our records management community would love to help, but our DoD community within itself would love to help you as well. Our librarians within the DoD community can be consulted also. We have great consultants within the DoD community that have experience in this, who have worked. I'm a contractor. We have experience in this. I'm just saying. We would love to help. So please reach out to your local librarians, your records managers.
Yeah, that's important. We have so that's one of the big challenges we have as well is data retention requirements, and there are mission-related data retention requirements that we have to meet, and there's records retention requirements if they qualify as records, which
And data does.
assuming it qualifies as a record, then yes, we have those.
Data also, and remember, it doesn't matter if it's 0 to 90 days. It does, but that's a whole different kettle of wax that we're not talking about that. We're talking about helping.
I'll remind my colleagues that there are certain questions that we were going to say is out of scope. And it's not intended to anything bad. It's just a matter of we've only got a limited amount of time.
And we're not talking about that.
No.
We're talking about the subject at hand.
Yeah, no, and this happens a lot because exactly what I was talking about before. There's an incident. People want to go back to look at the data, right, to see what happened during this particular time, and that is a challenge that we have. Other than just data retention, right? But we're not, managing our data as well as we should, and I think that is something that we're trying to fix through the establishing a data platform, a place that we can treat data as a product, and not as it's kind of it's important to make sure that we are treating it as the importance it is versus.
And that's what we want to do.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And that's what we want to help, because we want to evolve beyond just where it is right now. So we want to be able to get it flowing and beyond just stove piping.
So if your office has money, that would help.
This is
Wow.
Yeah.
So
It's not cheap. No, thank
That's why
you.
we're coming to you.
Yeah. Thanks.
Good afternoon, guys. It strikes me that most of the problems with the attack with some of these new AI, ChatGPT things, such as the real-time aspects, the interoperability aspects. What about the concept of maybe you guys making your own ChatGPT, running on your own data, your own environments, and get it out of the commercial base of what's happening there? Is there any thoughts about maybe making that sort of initiative? Because I think ChatGPT, how I've been using it, solves a lot of issues. There's a lot of things you're talking about. It has the capability to solve.
Yeah, so
I'm gonna point the finger at you. 'Cause
we were just talking about this, right? So it really comes down to how trustworthy is that data, right? So ChatGPT is great, awesome program. It's only as good as the information that's in it, right? And that's one of the things we're talking about here is having to make sure, how do you make sure that the data that you're accessing is as credible as possible? How do you trust it? How do you define it? Is it 100% reliable? Because I may not be a SME on physics, but if you ask me some questions on physics and I give you answers, do you trust me?
And you can train an AI model and tell it that Mickey Mouse won the 2020 election, and it will insist back to you that Mickey Mouse did. But so it's only as good as the data you provide.
It'll give you another link to some bizarre place that you source that.
Yep.
Right.
But I think there's a lot of things that can be used to attack these problems. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a couple of points with the whole ChatGPT and AI right now, even in industry. And I'd say that as much as we try to spend every last dollar that Robert Skinner has in his wallet, we hit a point. And if you're looking at Google and you're looking at Microsoft, and you're looking at these entities that are investing in AI, it is costing billions of dollars to get to ChatGPT. This wasn't an overnight. This was a project that started probably back in the 1970s, and it's been evolved as the term AI evolves. But that's a significant investment, and we can't use the public internet for 90% of the DoD's mission. We can't be feeding operational data into a public system and hoping it spits out and it has the OPSEC and the force protection concerns. And then we were also talking about how many different networks do we have that are completely independent and they are not allowed to talk to each other. So it's not one ChatGPT, it's what, 7 plus?
7-ish.
That I can even hint at that exists.
So Chuck, I mean, I like the question, right? I like where the thought is going, and you know, getting to a point where we can use machine learning or AI algorithms to work against our data is where I want to get to. But if we don't build that infrastructure, it's not going to be useful, right? So.
Yeah, and we need more tools to test whether the output from the AI models are giving us good versus bad, or mix results. But definitely from the perspective of taking repetitive tasks and replacing those repetitive tasks with AI, that is clearly something we want to do. Things that obviously we want to take advantage of to get to an answer faster. And it seems like all the vendor capabilities are AI these days anyway, so I can't really get away from it. I'm deploying it all the time. But
thank you, Scott, for feeding me my exit strategy of the government. So I'm going to create battle bots on television with 3 different AIs and fight against each other and come out which one's truth.
Anyone else?
Appreciate it.
Any other questions?
Well, it must be beer time because the questions are over.
Everyone's tired from lunch. Perfect.
Don't be shy.
Okay. I think we
Only
hit.
he bites.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. Any closing notes from anyone? No?
No.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Thanks for everyone.